Dear colleagues, I'm here today with Dr. Marianne Koch. She's a physician, she's an internist, had a career in private practice, had a career also as an author of patient books for self-help and health. And she was also an acclaimed actress in a previous life and a previous career. And she's the daughter of Rudolf Schindler. Schindler is one of the most eminent gastroenterologists of the last century, was born and raised in Germany, made a seminal discovery and development here in Munich by inventing a semi-flexible endoscope, a gastroscope, and was taken out of his office by the Nazi regime. Within a month after the Nazi takeover, he was taken into custody and could narrowly escape Nazi persecution on a boat from Amsterdam to New York. He made an American career, and I want to talk about him and his family today with Marianne Koch. And we start with you.
Okay.
You were born into a Munich family, and Rudolf Schindler is your father. And
yes.
We will get into the intricacy of the family affairs a little later.
Okay.
After graduating from high school with excellent degrees at the age of 70, you started to go to medical school here at LMU in Munich.
I've always wanted to become a doctor. Yeah.
A physician.
From a physician, yeah.
And the influence was maybe not so much your father, but the pediatrician your family attended.
Yes, we had a wonderful pediatrician, Dr. Rosemeyer, who was Jewish and who disappeared during the Nazi time. But I remember him even today as a doctor who could really talk to children and had all these, the era of being interested in the patients, not only in their whatever illness they had, but in the person that came to him.
And when you did your, what in the US would be called your BSc or your Physikum in Germany, where you have covered and set the exam for all the basic sciences, where you usually continue into your clinical part of your study, mm-hmm. You were picked up and discovered as an actress. How did that happen?
Like so many things in my life, it just happened. I used to work between the study months to gain money in Bavaria films, but not as an actress, but as a technician, you know, rolling the films and things like that.
So it was a student summer job where you did worked as a cutter, or you worked with the cutters for celluloid movies at the time.
Right. And a photographer, a set photographer, saw me there and said, they are trying to get a young lady for a certain part in one of those films. Why don't you present yourself and say hello to them? Which I did, curious and ready to get anything new. And I got the part. And that was the beginning of a film career that lasted 20 years.
20 years?
Yeah, at first I thought, well, I'll do this filming when there are holidays from the studies. And fortunately, I succeeded with making the Physikum, this first trial. And but then the offers I got were bigger and bigger, and then I decided, well, I'll postpone the studies for 2-3 years. It won't last longer, but from these 2-3 years, these 2-3 years became 20 years.
Became 20 years.
Yeah.
And there were some some real classics among these films where you're featured in or were a leading actress. One movie every German knows is The Devil's General, after the Zuckmayer novel on Harras, and the Helmut Keutner film with Kurt Jürgens.
Yeah.
What's probably more internationally known is the Gregory Peck film made in Berlin, which is called Night People. And most of all, the first movie that really put Clint Eastwood on the map for A Fistful of Dollars, the 1964 Italo-Western, we call it here, by Sergio Leone, with music from Ennio Morricone, where you played the leading part opposite of Clint Eastwood. How was that? That movie was not made in Hollywood. That movie was mostly made in Europe.
Mostly made in Europe, in Cinecittà in Italy,
Roma,
and in Madrid, in Spain.
I see.
And at first I didn't want to make the film. Then the distributor persuaded me financially. I didn't want to make it because I said, well, this is too cruel. And the leading person is a killer. You can't make a killer. Okay. So Clint Eastwood came, and he was, of course, a perfect killer, and very, very
Didn't say much in the movie. He didn't say much in the movie.
He said almost
His talking
nothing.
parts were very short, I think.
I think he fought with the director, Sergio Leone, and had him cut all his lines because...
Really?
Yeah, I think so. Not all of them, of course, but most of them, because he felt better not talking, but just standing there, and with a cigarillo and his poncho, and he had an immense presence in the film, and he's a very nice man. That
amazing.
Was amazing. So I played Marisol, this leading part there. I saw the film, I think, last time, maybe 5 years ago, and I was shocked. Too cruel.
Still too cruel. Yes. After all these years, it's too much brutality for the time. It made Italo-Western immensely popular. It set the stage for a career of Sergio Leone, who made two more in the same series.
Yeah. And later,
and Clint Eastwood became a great Once Upon a Time in the West.
In America.
So after 20 years of movie career, including Hollywood, where you for the first time met your father when he was an immigrant in Los Angeles,
right.
And you were an actress in Hollywood.
Yeah.
How was that meeting?
I don't remember everything about it. I just knew, I think I was a bit shaky inside. I grew up without a father, so that was the first time I knew he was my father. And I met good-looking, intelligent-looking, sensitive-looking scientist, obviously. And we had a nice talk, not too emotional. And after maybe 30, 40 minutes, I said goodbye, and that was it.
I see.
And I met him only a long time later when his first wife died, and he asked my mother whether she could come to America and be with him.
That's an unbelievable love story. But let's stay with you for a moment. After exactly 20 years, you continued to go to medical school. After the preclinical part was over, at age 40, you started the clinical part at LMU University.
I knew all the time, while making movies, that I would go back to medicine. This was for sure. Only the time point, the moment, when to turn back to, or turn forward to medicine, I didn't know. So it took 20 years for me to really say, enough. It was not that I didn't get any offers anymore, on the contrary. It was a decision which I had made all along my so-called career.
So this was, you really put an end to a 20-year movie career and to continue in medicine. Then you trained as you were an intern, a resident, you became a fully fledged internist.
All my friends were 20 years younger.
They were younger, right. And we're talking the 70s with bell-bottom trousers and flowery shirts. And while you were a talk show host at the same time. While you were a medical student, you were still doing a politically left-wing, very spontaneous talk show on German television. Is that right?
Like so many things in my life, I got an offer. Could you? Would you like to? And me being,
daring.
Courageous, yeah, daring.
You called it daring, and
let's say courageous, daring.
Yeah.
I took the offer and I succeeded. So I don't know why, but I was interested in people, and that this was a crazy show. Everybody could do whatever he or she wanted to, and it was a big success.
It was a success, and it was you turned into a political commentator at some point, putting in the 70s like problems with big pharma, environmental protection. All these were topics on your television show.
My first partner in one of these talks was a painter, famous painter, Padua, who was famous for having portrayed all the Nazi big people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And of course, me being very, very, very anti-Nazi, of course, with this background,
your family,
I asked him what he thought about it, and whether he thought he could just continue now in the new democratic and he said he didn't give a damn about what people do unless they have an interesting face.
I see. That's an interesting perspective for a painter.
Yeah.
Not a real conscience.
Yeah. So, it went on like that, and I actually enjoyed doing that.
Great.
Once a month. And the rest of the time I studied.
Dedicated to studying medicine.
Yeah.
And you finished your MD thesis. You did science for your MD thesis with magna or summa cum laude, so the highest degree. And then you went into a residency program at Starnberg, where you really became a clinician and opened a practice in Munich at Orleansplatz. And
at the age of 55, I opened my own
55
practice.
You started?
Yeah.
And you told me that this was very fulfilling to treat patients.
Yeah.
You also gave talks on hypertension. And when they asked you to close down your practice, because there was, in Germany, we have age limits for all types of things in public life. And at 68, what did you do then?
I was very sad because I loved working as a doctor. That was everything I had strived for. And then I remember that I had some practice in explaining my patients and people medicine, medical things, and therapies and things like that. My patients had taught me how to talk and how to explain things to them in normal language.
Everyday language.
Yeah.
So
I started writing books. Medical, for normal people who are interested in getting more knowledge in medical things.
Self-help books, advice books.
Advice books.
Books on nutrition, books on aging, and they became immensely.
The immune system.
The immune system, one of the latest we discussed at another opportunity. And you still have your own radio show every week. this is amazing. How did this happen? This is going on for 20 years,
Yeah.
that every Wednesday you have your own health radio show.
3 days in 1 month.
Okay.
Not every week, but 3 weeks, and then somebody
3 out of
else is
4.
on. Yeah.
3 out of 4
3
Wednesdays.
out of 4.
You get 1 Wednesday off.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
this is amazing.
It happened like everything in my life. I got the offer to be expert in a radio show about psychosomatic and psychiatric things. And I said, sorry, this is not something my field. I'm not good at it, so sorry. The only thing I could do in this medium is normal internal medicine. And they said, oh, yes.
That's what we do.
Just like it.
It's pretty amazing, because I had the wonderful opportunity to be on 2 of your shows.
Oh, we had the opportunity to have you in the show.
No, but you prepare meticulously on every one of these broadcasts, on every different topic. And you allowed me to admit to the audience that Marianne Koch is over 90 years old, and she's the only broadcaster in TV, on the internet, or in radio who does have her own regular show for 20 years and continues this with great success, where people call in all the time.
You know, I think it's, for me, it's so good to have the show, because I'm forced to really keep up with modern medicine. And as you say, I try to know what I'm talking about. And
you do know what you're talking about. I can tell from the people calling in.
And so, since we have very, very different sorts of shows, sorts of subject, medical subject.
Every week a different subject. Always in medicine, but always something different.
Like anesthesia and...
tomorrow is anesthesia.
Tomorrow's
anesthesia in old age.
Yeah, right.
Amazing.
And last week was cancer of the darm.
Bowel cancer or colon cancer.
Yeah, colon cancer. And, well, you see, very, very different
A very broad
things.
spectrum.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're kind of in the footsteps of your father, but the family started quite different. Your father was born in the year of 3 emperors in 1888 as the son of a Berlin banker, Ignaz Schindler. And after studying medicine in Berlin and Freiburg, he came to Munich. Do you know why, just before the First World War, he made that move, whether that was personal or professional, or whether he sought a special education?
I think it was professional.
It was professional.
Yeah.
Because he started here in Munich for his first year, what many people did at the time, what I still did, that first you go to pathology to learn the basics, and then go to clinical training. The First World War interrupted that. So after his pathology internship, he was recruited into the German army and fought in the First World War, also in Verdun and in Arras. And some of his experience, I don't think he was ever wounded in the war, but he was ill in the war.
He was ill, I don't know, from bad water or whatever.
Dysentery.
It was dysentery.
What they called it at the time. Yeah.
Yeah, and after the war, he decided to go in that field, gastroenterology.
Right. And he trained here at the 2nd Medical Department in Munich with Otto Neubauer, who happened to also be Jewish and who was also expelled by the Nazis. I don't know much about his personal history, but he must have been a good teacher, because he allowed him to dabble in the then available endoscopic techniques from 1919 on.
Which was a bit strange for us today.
That is right. Endoscopes were essentially esophagoscopes. They were stiff metal tubes And if you pushed them a little longer, you could get into the stomach, and that was the technique at the time. It was dangerous. It looked more like a circus act where someone swallows a dagger or a sword. Yeah. And what did your father develop then?
He thought that the gastroscope should be more flexible. And he found a wonderful technician, Georg Wolf, who had experience with instruments, all sorts of instruments, and also with optical things. And so they developed the semi-flexible gastroscope, which had a lot of little. Oh, you have
I brought one, which is actually, despite its age, brand new. So there is still the cellophane wrapping here. This is from the 1930s. And it's never been used, because I can tell from the packaging. It was a spare one we had at our hospital. And this is the amazing thing, that it has a soft tip. Sometimes there was a rubber tip in addition to the round metal ball.
And it has a light there?
There's a light bulb in there with electrical wiring that comes out here. Yeah.
And inside the rubber are lenses, lots of lenses.
Yeah. Lots of little lenses. He didn't use at the time fiber optics, although one of his students had already done experiments with fiber optics. So it was a lens system, and you had a sideways optic. And this was an extremely safe way, compared to the previous technique, to go into the stomach. And he published several volumes of papers and a book with beautiful watercolors, because there was no photography possibility at the time.
Yeah, sure.
At the end of this lens, you couldn't take real color photographs. So he had, and contributed to it itself, watercolors to illustrate the findings.
So you could see the live stomach, instead of just the stomach which you had in pathology.
Yes. During his life, he did more than 10,000 of these endoscopies, by far the most anyone had done in the world. And when this was introduced in 1931, it was the state of the art for 25 years. It took till the late 50s, actually 1958, when Basil Hershowitz in the US introduced the first fiber optic instrument, which was not semi-flexible but fully flexible, and which used fiberglass to conduct the light and to conduct the optical image. And for a quarter of the century, your father was a leading figure in that area. The Nazis didn't appreciate very much what he had. He still had accolades, claim international fame in 1933. But when the Nazis came to power, what happened to him?
He knew there were going to be difficulties. And one of the first things they did, they forbade him to be the conductor of the Bavarian Doctors' Orchestra, which he had enjoyed being. But on the other side, he got into trouble because somebody said bad things about him. And so the Nazis took him into custody.
What they euphemistically called protective custody.
Protective custody,
yeah.
But he knew after he was released after lots of people from all over the world protested against him being in custody, because he was quite well known at that time. And so they released him, and he decided to go out of Germany as soon as possible with his family. And he succeeded to get a boat from Amsterdam to New York. And then he went to Chicago, because in Chicago he had friends who had been his pupils in Germany,
Munich. So
in Munich.
His former students
and
were
they
there.
had sort of brought his knowledge and what they thought about him to Chicago. And so Dr. Palmer and Marie, well, his people who he knew, managed to get him a position in Chicago University. And there he was the center of the new art of endoscopy.
Right, which with an instrument that that he had invented. I think it's Marie Ortmeyer.
Marie Ortmeyer, yeah, thank you.
And the good thing was that he was internationally known. That's probably the only reason why they released him. You were kind enough to give me the police papers,
yeah.
Where they finally let him go in spite of the accusation. And interesting, it's signed by Reinhard Heydrich, who was then still in Munich, was one of the most infamous Nazi persecutors in his later positions before he was assassinated. And for him, it was very fortunate that he, his then wife, and his 2 children were welcomed in Chicago by friends who actually. His status was that of a mere visiting professor. The University of Chicago didn't pay a salary. Nominally they did, but all his colleagues put money together so he could receive a salary, official salary by the University of Chicago. And
it was very, very, very kind and
very kind. He must have been on a human level an extremely popular man, that people were so grateful for his friendship, or so respectful for his research. He must have been,
he must have been a very empathetic person, although being strict and disciplined in his art and his
a very
science.
Prussian person, and that didn't come across easily in some parts of the world. Then he left Chicago with his family and went to California and had a position at Loma Linda University.
Yeah.
And this is all the time where you told me you met him, when you were a Hollywood actress and he was not a Hollywood but a Loma Linda physician.
Well, Los Angeles, greater Los Angeles, yeah.
When he was 70, they stopped his contract there. And then he did something very interesting. He went to Brazil and learned Portuguese. Can you tell us something about that?
Obviously, he had studied Portuguese in advance because at the age of 70, you couldn't be employed anymore in the university. So he had planned that way before. And then he went to Belo Horizonte, Minas Gerais, and was a professor there and teaching in Portuguese.
In Brazil, in Portuguese. Amazing.
Amazing, he spoke French fluently, and obviously, I have been told, could speak Latin and also Greek. Well, these were the languages you learned at that time when you were in...
Still in my days, we had to go through the Latin course.
Latin too, but Latin is good. I think a lot of things can be explained better if you have some ideas about Latin. But Greek, my God. Well, anyway, he was...
I was allowed to choose French over Greek, ancient Greek, so I'm very happy I chose French.
I bet. Yeah. I had French too, well, and from he came back to the States after his wife became sick and could not stand the heat climate there in Minas Gerais, and a couple of years later, his wife died, and.
And he did something very interesting then.
Not even 3 weeks later, he called my mom, my mother, and said, well, I think they had been in some sort of contact, being spiritual or real, I don't know.
You don't have any letters between your mother
before
and...
the war. And of course, we got care packages after the war, which was very good.
Oh, you did? He did send packages?
Yeah, send packages.
I see.
Yeah. But I don't know how far this... well, anyway, my mother took about 3 days to get somebody to take the cat and to pack, and then flew to...
Immediately.
Yeah. It was
how much her senior was here? He was 15 years older than she was, or what was their age difference?
She was born in 1901, and he in 88, at 13 years.
So 13 years.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they lived happily in Long Beach for 1 year, and then they decided to come back to Germany.
Who decided that, your mom, or did he want to return?
I think
Germany?
they agreed.
They agreed,
They
okay.
agreed, yeah.
So it was the consensus to return to Germany. Yeah.
And of course, when he came back to Germany, he was not only welcomed, but honored, and they lived there 3 more years before he died.
I see. And that was the time where you got to know him better.
And then I really got to know him, yeah.
It's a wild story, because when he was in Munich, he was an established physician at Schwabing Hospital and in private practice. He had an internationally known practice with many foreign visitors.
Yeah.
Established a family with his wife Gabriele and 2 children, and still somehow met your mother.
She was a patient.
Oh, she was a patient.
She was a patient of his.
She was a
patient of his, and it must have been, as she told me, that they were standing there across from each other, and it just...
He didn't meet her through a semiflexible gastroscope, but in person. Okay.
No.
And it was love at first sight.
Yeah.
And they
Obviously.
had 2 children together.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a situation like Charles Lindbergh, who had a family in Germany and a family in the US, but this was the secret family.
Completely secret. My mother married later when he was in America, and it was not a very happy marriage, and it lasted only 3 years or 4 years. And then she was a
single mom.
Single mom, yeah.
But you have your name from your stepfather, who then
he was
immigrated
very nice,
to South Africa.
Who adopted the children, and I'm very grateful to this man too, of course, but mostly to my mother, who really succeeded in getting her 2 children safely through the war, and filling us with self-esteem and Vertrauen, was ist Vertrauen? Self-confidence.
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 And made you daring.
Yeah, I bet. Because even as a small child of, I don't know, 7 or 8 years, we were raised at a very, very long line, So when I was 8 years old, I got into the tramway, got to the station, got into the train to Fürstenfeldbruck, where my grandmother lived, all by myself. I was a very, well, as you say, daring.
Daring and self-confident. That's why you had so many careers in your life, as an actress, a TV producer, and book author.
Yeah.
And,
I think it's so important for children to be raised with their self-esteem and self-confidence high up by everyone.
Very fantastic. Rudolf Schindler has received many prizes and honors in his life. The American Society for Gastrointestinal Endoscopy, which he founded initially as the Gastroscopic Society, then as president of the ASGE, has named their highest honor, the Rudolf Schindler Prize. And this is given out to people who have advanced the field of endoscopy, of which he was a pioneer. For 25 years, his technological advance and his expertise set the standard for gastroscopy internationally. And this year, the German Society for Internal Medicine will grant the honorary membership posthumously to Rudolf Schindler as one of their greats here from Munich. And it is absolutely fantastic that his daughter, Marianne Koch, who's also an internist and also a physician, will accept the prize in his stead.
I feel very, very privileged to be able to get this prize for him. And I do hope that from distant cloud he'll look down and be happy too. Thank you so much.
We are very honored that you will be at the conferences on May 1st, that you will speak about your father, and that you will accept this honorary membership in his stead. Thank you very much for the privilege of your time.
Thank you, Professor Lerch. Thank you very much.